Hello, and welcome to this week's Movie Math, where we're experiencing kind of a new phenomenon these days. Before, people just used to be curious how movies were doing and if their favorite films did well. But now, like sports, you have people rooting against certain movies, while at the same time, that aggression against the film gets some people to root for that film even more. I mean, in some ways, Snow White is like the Kansas City Chiefs of this weekend. And like the Kansas City Chiefs, but this year's Super Bowl, it did not go well for them, nor for Disney. Disney is 0 for 2 so far in 2025. Let's discuss. So yes, while it used to be only Star Wars that was sputtering, now all of Disney's big brands are making a funny noise. Bob Iger's been quietly swapping out division heads, Disney Live Action, I bet you didn't even really know about that, Disney Animation, and likely one more before the end of the year. We'll see. But he still has to clear the slate of movies that had already been greenlit. You know, I think that only Warner Brothers, only Zazie could write them off because it was a transition period as he just acquired the Warner Brothers studio. I don't think Disney has that same luxury. But is the mouse even worried? Hard to tell if they are, hard to tell if they should be. Listen, let me show you where I'm going with this. Because after all, I looked, they still have the top Hollywood movie of the year so far. What a horrible year this has been for movies to date. I sure hope summer turns things around. And they had the top 3 movies last year, all billion-dollar films and the only billion-dollar films of the year. Not a single other studio could get a billion-dollar picture. Disney had 3. And while again this year is so far not so good, Disney still has a very good chance by the end of the year of having another $3 billion pictures. I'm talking Lilo and... You're probably like, how did they keep getting away with this? Lilo and Stitch, Zootopia 2, primed to explode in China as they cleverly were ready for the Year of the Snake. And of course, Avatar, Fire, and Ash. You throw enough stuff at the wall, and a lot of... Disney has good IP. They throw more stuff at the wall than any other studio. They release more than anyone else. So yes, the Disney machine will keep chugging along, but that's not to say that there won't be some individuals who get jettisoned out and run over as the machine leaves them behind. But before we get to the juicy part of who's to blame for the debacle that is Snow White, I'm sure many of you have your own ideas. We gotta admit though that speaking of the Disney machine, the machine tried its hardest. The people who didn't actually make the movie but had to deal with it, they worked their hardest to overcome the rotten apple that was handed to them. They pulled out all the stops, carefully curated and closed off premieres, a social media embargo that focused on influencers and fans instead of critics, a last-minute review embargo for said critics, and working hand in hand with several outlets, we all saw it on social media, to pump out positive headlines. You didn't see the headline? Here it is again, and again, and again, and again. I mean, at the end of the day, it wasn't enough, but they worked hard, perhaps whistling while they worked. We've all been there, because sometimes life hands you a rotten apple, and you just have to deal with it. Now, like Snow White, you can whistle while you work, but sometimes you're just tired. Put the broom down, girl, and relax, and let Factor make dinner easy. Yes, Factor from our friends at HelloFresh is blowing up. I'm sure you're seeing their ads all over, even on TV, because they're providing quick and nutritious meals throughout the kingdom. Pop quiz! How many times did you order takeout this week? I bet it was more than once, but I get it. You're busy, it's late, you just want to sit down and eat, and with Factor, you can. These ready-to-eat, never-frozen meals are ready in the microwave in just minutes. Plus, they're healthier and cheaper than those takeout meals. I try to eat healthy during the week so that I can have a cheat meal on the weekend, and Factor helps me keep that promise to myself. They have keto meals like Green Goddess chicken, calorie smart meals like beef bolognese and mushroom lasagnette, protein plus meals like Fiesta salmon, and you can even eat like a king with gourmet meals like truffle butter filet mignon. And you can get all these great meals delivered directly to your door now for even less with this magical offer. Head to factor75.com or click the link right down below and use code 50BTT to get 50% off plus free shipping with your first Factor box. That's code 50BTT at factor75.com to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first Factor box. Give it a try! And thanks to Factor for sponsoring this episode of Movie Math. Now, let's get down to it. Who is to blame for Snow White? I'm going to list them in what I think is the order of who's to blame. And of course, as I said, I'm sure you have your own thoughts on the subject matter and rankings, which you can share down below in the comments. So I'm sorry to say that the person who I think shoulders the most blame for this flop is Rachel Zegler. Now, other liberal-skewing female-focused films like Barbie and Wicked, they managed to come out of nowhere and blindside toxic hate channels. Those channels didn't have a lot of, and outlets, they didn't have a lot of time to prepare and were caught off guard. I do worry very much about the sequels for those films. We don't know if we're getting a Barbie 2, but Wicked, of course, will come out later this year, Wicked 2. But meanwhile, Zegler put a giant target on Snow White almost 3 years in advance. That is a huge heads up. She did that when she was promoting Snow White at 2022's D23 Expo. That was a lot of time to organize, and well organized the toxicity was. Now, Zegler and I'm not just saying that's the only problem with the film, but that was certainly an aspect as to what happened. Now, Zegler has every right to speak up and also it wasn't just toxic groups, but I think that, to be fair, Zegler ticked off, some middle of the road people as well. Now, Zegler has every right to speak up for what she believes in. And if she goes down with this, I think, as I said on the live stream the other day, I hope at the very least she takes solace in the fact that she fought for what she believed in. But it's important on that note to understand that speaking out on very controversial, difficult subjects, and she spoke out on a lot of them, severely limits an audience, aka a customer base. And this isn't, by the way, something that's a phenomenon that's unique to Rachel Zegler. Jane Fonda was one of the biggest stars in Hollywood until her comments during the Vietnam War. And it took her a very long time to recover from that. And some could even argue that she never fully recovered. And this isn't also just, something that's in Hollywood. And it's not just the right reacting to left comments. It can go in the other direction. Look at what Elon Musk is experiencing with the Tesla brand. And then also, as Michael Jordan famously said, Republicans buy sneakers too. It's just a fact of trying to sell something that needs to have a large customer base. Now, again, as I said, and I want to make this clear, Zegler has every right to speak up for what she feels is important. And as I said, she spoke out on several issues and has continued to do so, even up until the film's release. Disney severely limited the number of interviews she was doing, but, when she did do an interview, she still spoke up about a number of things. So it's obviously very important to her, and she obviously feels that she did the right thing. But I hope she, again, realizes that it could, and seems to actually make her very difficult, if not impossible, to cast in a 4-quadrant film that needs to have broad appeal. A movie with a $270 million budget, that was due to some other circumstances, strikes, COVID, there was apparently a fire on the set of the movie. But that's even before advertising. That's incredibly expensive. That type of film can't afford to lose any potential audience members, not a one. Now, does the same go for Gal Gadot? Now, that, in my opinion, is a far more complex issue. And with Gadot's own homeland under horrific attack, that creates, I think, a more sympathetic situation. But I would counter on that note that I don't think it would hurt her to show more sympathy for the civilians in Gaza. Again, especially if she wants to be in a 4-quadrant global film. Honestly, though, I think Gal Gadot did more damage to Snow White by being a truly awful actress in the film. Just awful. And also, this was, I think, another issue, doing almost all of her press by herself. Now, nobody knows for sure if it was Gadot or Zegler who wouldn't do press with the other one. Maybe it was both of them. Maybe neither one of them wanted to appear with the other one. They only appeared together at the Oscars. I think they took one photo together on the red carpet, just the two of them. Learn from Blake Lively. No matter what's going on behind the scenes, you just have to get through the press tour. Then you never have to see these people again. Maybe there's a sequel, but cross that bridge when you get to it. Because look how things can spiral out of control. You have a lot of films these days where the narrative around the film is overshadowing the film itself. Now, also, something that helps that happen is if the film is not very good. And that's also an issue here. So I also have to blame the director, Mark Webb, and the producer, Mark Platt. Now, what about all the writers on the movie? Well, in Hollywood, with movies, writers have very little power. They're much more powerful in the series and show space. So for a movie, the responsibility lies with the director and the producer and or producers. With Snow White, Webb and Platt handed in, the two Marks, they handed in a chopped up mess with little in common and little regard for the 1937 original film. Barbie and Wicked are great movies. Snow White, it's not even a good film. You know, I think even for those of you defending it, I think you'd have to agree that it's just maybe good enough. I don't even think that, I wouldn't even describe it that way. I think it has good elements, but overall is a mess. As for who they delivered the film to, as I said, Bob Iger has already brought in a new team to head up Disney live action, but it was too late for Snow White. All right, so that's a real shame considering it was the film that started it all. Yet at the same time, Disney has had a very difficult case of it, making today's audiences have any interest in remakes of their much older Disney films. I mean, there's always the Disney fans out there, like you, some of you and me, who respect and love this classic material. And, a lot of us will be like, why don't you respect the classics? But, it's the same reason a lot of people don't want to watch black and white. Although Netflix got people to be okay with subtitles, which is interesting enough. I guess because a lot of times people today watch stuff, they can't really hear it. And so it's interesting. I don't know if anyone's going to bring anyone around to older content, though. And that's an issue for these older classic Disney projects. Also, speaking of being honest, Snow White is by far and away the least popular Disney princess. Nobody ever wants to talk to her. Nobody ever really wants to be Snow White. She never gets any attention in the group. So why would they think that her movie would do particularly well? I think they felt that Rachel Zegler was such a current modern star. It's that who has a lot of Instagram followers thinking. But as some of you pointed out, that does not always translate into ticket dollars, especially when, she made the choice, let's just say, to kind of, limit the audience and appeal of the film with some of her comments. All right, so some of you might be like, it's only the first weekend, Grace. How do we know Snow White's a flop? It might be a Mufasa. All right, well, let's break it down. Let's talk about it. We'll get to Mufasa in a moment. But first, it has opened very low for a Disney live-action adaptation, with the trades comparing it to 2019's Dumbo, which also, by the way, took quite a few liberties with one of Disney's much older animated classics. And it ended up having very little money to show for it by the end of its run. Snow White is underperforming out of the gate. Domestically, it came in below the $50 million projection, and it underperformed overseas, not hitting the last minute. Very last minute, Disney was like maybe $100 million global. Couldn't do it. Captain America 4 opened with double that's what Snow White did, yet it's going to end its run basically at around $400 million, which it just hit. It's going to go a little past that, but I don't think by much. Dumbo only got to $353 worldwide, while with Snow White's budget, if you go by the rules that at the very least to break even, you need 2.5 times your budget because you have to factor in that you don't get all of the box office. You got to split it with the theaters. And then you also have to earn back your advertising money. That puts Snow White at the bare minimum of a break-even point at $675. To not lose money, it has to get to $675. 2023's The Little Mermaid, which opened much higher with $100 million, it couldn't even get to that high. Now, as some of you are saying, what about Mufasa? So what about Mufasa? Well, Mufasa hit theaters, as you know, in December. It was pitted against Sonic 3. And it opened even lower than Snow White, like 10 million lower than Snow White. But it got all the way to over 700 million worldwide. That would at least make Snow White make a little bit of money. But keep in mind that the films that come out during the holidays historically are able to make up a lot of money in the empty months of January and February. Now, there's not really a lot of family films coming out, but a big movie like Snow White needs adults to go and see it as well. And there are a number of movies and Minecraft coming out over the next few weeks. But here's the big difference. Here's the big difference between Snow White and Mufasa. Audience scores. Whoo boy! You're about to find out why CinemaScore is so important. So Mufasa had not only a stronger Rotten Tomatoes audience score, but it had a better cinema score. In fact, no Disney live-action remake, even Dumbo, even Maleficent 2, has scored outside of the A range when it comes to cinema score, besides Snow White. How did we know that Captain America 4 was doomed its opening weekend when it could have been right on the line? B- cinema score. Now, sure, as I've said in the past, you can work with a B+ cinema score. That's not the end of the road for a movie. Joker got a B. The original Joker got a B+ and made $1 billion at the end of the day. But yet, the last Hunger Games, also starring Rachel Zegler, also scored a B+, which was low for that franchise. You got to also look at the perspective of how people usually rate the franchise. That only got to 348, right around where Dumbo ended up worldwide. And they even actually, Hunger Games even actually opened the same as Snow White. So it seems that might be a good comp for Snow White as well. So I think mid-300s does indeed look like that's where Snow White is headed, which is less than what Disney, forget breaking even, that is less than what Disney spent to make and market the film. Because, an advertising budget is usually at least $100 million for a big movie like this. It certainly wasn't $30 million. And speaking of narrowing its audience, even beyond political statements, which created an issue for this movie, Snow White is skewing extremely female at 68%. As you might recall, the Marvels actually ended up skewing male, but even Beauty and the Beast was just 60% female, Aladdin 59% female. Barbie, though, 71% female, and Wicked 72%. So Snow White's problem, so you can make a lot of money with that level of, female interest over male, but scale was the real problem for Snow White because the age and ethnicity demos were also pretty spread out. So you have to factor in that just a lot of people didn't want to go. And that's again because unlike Barbie and Wicked, you have not a great movie. There was at first a perception that Snow White was not going to be a good movie, but that perception became a reality with these audience scores. It has one more weekend to go all to itself before Minecraft hits for the end of spring break. And we'll see what that second weekend drop looks like. Where do you think Snow White will end up, right? And could it be saved down the line on digital and maybe on Disney+? Are you waiting to watch it on Disney+? All right, so another movie came out this weekend. What? Alto Knights. And well, let's just say the chatter about Warner Brothers' film division being in deep doo-doo isn't going to die down anytime soon. Whew! Especially, what a stink coming off that slate. Especially with Mickey 17 continuing to quickly drop at the box office. It's not even probably going to hit 50 million domestic, and it goes to digital this Tuesday. I mean, it's done. It should go to digital. Can Warner Brothers change the conversation, though, in April with back-to-back releases Minecraft and Sinners? Maybe they can. I'm sure they're hoping so. But those are, if those two movies can't change this to a positive conversation, they really do have problems over there. All right, as for the rest of the top 10, what a pleasant surprise for Black Bag fans. Yes, those of you who are in favor of intellectually stimulating cinema, which some of us find a little boring. I thought Black Bag was okay, but, it's a little bit of a boring movie, but it doesn't mean it's not interesting and have good points. Better than Snow White. But anyway, you should be thrilled that the film fell just 42% in its second weekend and held on to the number 2 spot. Very good news for Fassi in particular. Cate Blanchett just works. She's like Nicole Kidman. They will do they say no to anything? Or maybe they're just getting that many offers. But Michael Fassbender has needed to remind people that he can still sell some tickets. And I think this is very nice for him. Steven Soderbergh, I don't think Steven Soderbergh even cares at this point. Sure, it hasn't even made 20 million domestic so far, but this bodes very well for its digital prospects, showing that Universal, this is from Uni, is still the master of the theatrical to digital dance. They just really know what they're doing over there. Novocaine's theatrical run is also basically just an advertisement for digital and streaming down the line. Well, hey, at least The Monkey can claim it made way more money than those two movies, even if it is only about half of what Osgood Perkins' last film, Longlegs, made. Like Mickey 17, The Monkey will also be on digital this Tuesday. Mickey 17 is only medium. I thought The Monkey was very interesting. So you might want to check that out. A little depressing, though, but very interesting. And Looney Tunes had a respectable hold in its second weekend. Although it was so low down to begin with, it's probably not even going to hit 10 million domestic. But again, We're seeing a lot of stuff that's just an advertisement for digital and streaming. When it hits digital, you go, oh yeah, that was a theatrical release. So that gives it a little bit of cachet. So they almost are chalking up these theatrical runs to part of the advertising these days. But this is why Ketchup Entertainment, I think, is willing to pay Warner Brothers $50 million to now save Coyote versus Acme, which I think would do much better. I don't know how much better, but it would have to. I would hope it would make more than $10 million. Did you see Looney Tunes in theaters? Are you going to watch it down the line? And how would you react to Coyote versus Acme? Where would you watch that? Now, speaking of streaming, let's take a look at streaming. All right, so as usual, we're starting with Nielsen from mid-February, late to mid-February. This was the final week for Disney's Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, which has never got into the top 10, even with the potential binge bump at the end. People wait till the end to binge it, and sometimes that'll push a show finally onto Nielsen. Not here, showing that outside of Invincible, which fell off, by the way, this week off of the charts, animation is still struggling on streaming. But that's not a knock at Invincible. It'll probably pop back up with its finale. All right, so anyway, however, while it couldn't make the overall chart, it just missed it. Here's The White Lotus in its first full week on Nielsen. Like many HBO shows, it drops on Sunday nights, which, Nielsen charts run from Monday to Sunday. So it's very hard on the first night to chart. But it had a full week, and it's doing pretty good. And remember, this is an acquired show, so that's not even all of its viewership. They should just merge. I guess they have contractual obligations, so that's why they can't. But boy, does it really stink for HBO that they have to split their numbers, their viewership with Max, because they would be doing much better on Nielsen charts if that weren't the case. Great news for White Lotus, though, right? Not so great for the Penguin, which was used, the White Lotus was a comparison to that, but the Penguin only managed to chart on Nielsen with its final episode. Although the White Lotus is working with back seasons, it's already on season 3. So a lot of people, what helps the Nielsen numbers is that new fans who want to join in the current hype have to catch up on previous seasons. I have a friend who just mainlined seasons 1 and 2 so they could jump into season 3. Are you late to joining the White Lotus party? I'm very curious to see the reaction to tonight's episode. Tonight is the last episode that I saw in advance. And then there's just 2 more after that. All right, back to the overall chart. Speaking of shows in their 3rd seasons, Reacher is once again a big hit. And look at Yellow Jackets on the overall chart. That's amazing. That's huge for Sophie Thatcher, coupled with all the buzz she just got off of Companion. Her agent must be like, what should we do, Sophie? What should we do? Let's try to really do something exciting. All right, also, this was the window for SNL's 50th anniversary celebration where they had 2 specials, the music one and then also the big special on Sunday night. And that was right before this window on Nielsen, and you can see that with rewatching that did extremely well on Peacock. Resident Alien is also still on the overall chart, just like it was last week, as that cable show has put its previous 3 seasons on Netflix and Peacock before the 4th season. And Star Power still makes a difference as the subpar Zero Day with Robert De Niro, big number 1 out of the gate. I think Star Power and binging. I think that's what happened there. Because, that's, way bigger than Paradise, but Paradise is a week to week and those shows are, again, very similar. Speaking of the originals chart, all right, interestingly, both Severance and Paradise are slipping a little bit. Ooh, I don't know if it's so much that they're slipping or other shows are bigger, but they're slipping down the chart, maybe bleeding some viewers with this week-to-week mystery. I know, especially with Severance, some people got a little frustrated. But I'm curious to see how Severance will perform on Nielsen with the end of its season finale, which of course just happened. We'll talk about that in a moment. But anyway, they might have been bleeding some viewers, and this might show some frustration with the seasons, particularly against Severance season 2. But they're both still in the chart. They're both still in the top 10, and they're both very important to their respective streaming services. Apple TV and Hulu don't get a lot of shows on these charts, and so these shows, even if they do slip a little bit, they're important to the services, and both have been renewed for new seasons. Severance is also likely to be an awards juggernaut for Apple TV, and there's real value in that as well. I'm sure, even peripherally, you noticed the Severance mania that erupted this weekend with the season 2 finale. Did it convince any of you to give the show a try? All of my friends who were like, I'm done with this show, it's so slow, are back in after watching the Thursday finale. I've watched it 3 times, actually, twice to cover it, and then again with some friends over the weekend. I was like, I want to watch it again. It's really phenomenal television. Not everybody agrees, but I think it's excellent. Then with movies, Netflix does it again, blowing up a little movie from 2023 that slipped through the cracks, but yet is doing very well on their service. I get it. Shailene Woodley and Ben Mendelsohn are a tempting combo to click on. The Rotten Tomatoes scores aren't great, but that doesn't seem to be as important when it comes to streaming movies. Although the movie numbers overall are very low. Not too much happening over here. The Gorge, speaking of Apple TV, still pretty high up. There's Netflix's original film, La Dolce Vita, which we were talking about on some previous episodes on Netflix's charts. And Nosferatu hit Peacock, and you can see people are watching that as well. Now, speaking of Netflix's charts, all right, so over here, this is for just last week, of course, and speaking of original movies, there's the ridiculously expensive The Electric State at number 1, but with just 25 million views. For comparison, Extraction 2, also from the Russos, by the way, but they didn't direct it, that debuted with 43 million views. Great movie, I'm sure far cheaper than The Electric State. And also Leave the World Behind, that debuted with 42 million views. So, in the 40s is really at the very least what you're looking for here. Don't blame Millie Bobby Brown. Her Damsel debuted with 35 million viewers, so that's 10 million more. And I wouldn't say it's Chris Pratt's fault either. It's the Russo brothers, who've made crap after crap after crap, and therefore flop after flop after flop post-Marvel. It's not like people are like, people don't feel these projects are being cheated. They're like, yeah, those are bad. But they made a lot of money. They made a ton of money with this run, as streaming doesn't do back end, so they pay bonuses up front. Although, I don't know how much longer that policy is going to continue, because giant embarrassing flops like this show that it's just not sustainable. It's ridiculous. It really has to be bonuses, tied to viewership, instead of giving a percentage of the earnings. Which is a little bit like what the Writers Guild and Actors Guild worked out during the strikes for streaming bonuses. So I think you might start to see that be what's in deals instead. But the Russo brothers already have their money. The Russos are going back to Marvel, speaking of money, and let's hope they've still got it, as the comic book movie space is very different from the way they left it. So I'm really curious. It's not as friendly a space from fans or critics or media or anybody. A lot less forgiving. Although I really liked Endgame, to be honest with you. And the Russo brothers, their Marvel work was very good. Also, speaking of flops, sure enough, box office flops, Craven and Trap found an audience on Netflix where people are just looking for something to click on. Netflix, they keep you from churning. It's much more interesting, though, over on the shows chart, where the far more inexpensive Adolescence debuted also at number 1 with the same number of views as The Electric State. This is being heralded as the new baby reindeer. I'm starting to watch it. I checked out a couple of scenes with all the hoopla, and I was finally like, all right, let me watch this thing. It's amazing. I love Adolescence. I've only watched the first episode. I'm probably going to watch some more tonight. It's really, really well done. Star Stephen Graham is also the co-creator and co-writer, so look to be seeing him probably during the next upcoming awards season, competing with Severance. There's too much good TV. It's too much. Everything can't possibly get the flowers that it deserves. Running Point also continues to do very well for Netflix. I love this show too. I just finished the season. It's fantastic, and it's a big win for Kate Hudson. That's going to really put her back on the map. And also for co-creator and co-showrunner Mindy Kaling, who really needed the win after, speaking of debacles, the Velma debacle. Ike Barinholtz is also a co-creator and co-showrunner on Running Point, and he is having a great run right now. Speaking of a run, he's doing amazing. Not only does he have Running Point, but he's a co-star on The Studio, which starts this Wednesday on Apple TV. He's excellent on that show. All right, now let's take a look at digital. Okay, so over here, Anora hit Hulu and totally fell out of the top 10 as a result. Although if you want to get your kink on, for just $6 you can, with Baby Girl and Nosferatu. Last Breath also just hit digital and is number 1. Well, look at Wicked. It's, that also is now on a streaming service, Peacock, but it's still very high up on this chart, also now available for just a $6 rental. Wicked and Nosferatu, they're both now on Peacock at no extra cost, but it's not hurting them on the charts. Like Anora was pulled off because it's now on Hulu. But these other movies, even though they're on Peacock, they're not falling off. And maybe that's because there are not a lot of Peacock subscribers. That's what that seems to say to me. And speaking of sales, Apple TV is having a huge sale, because all the movies are just available for just $6 now. They're also selling a lot of bundles, and you can see the Hunger Games bundle is charting, as well as a 25 action movie collection for just $25. That's just $1 a movie. Some of those movies I wouldn't even say are worth $1, but still, 25 movies for $25, that's a really good strategy. That's very clever. That's very, very clever. Did any of you buy it? All right. I mean, some of those movies are like a handful of them are really good, so it's probably worth the $25. All right. So Hollywood. So what's coming out this weekend? So Hollywood has given Disney and Snow White a freebie because there's no big movies hitting theaters to compete with it in its second weekend. Minecraft is 2 weekends out. Instead, this coming weekend, there's just a sprinkling of smaller films. There's A24's Death of a Unicorn, which to me has a streaming movie written all over it. Universal and Blumhouse's The Woman in the Yard, and Amazon MGM has Jason Statham's latest action flick. Will that be another sleeper hit? We'll see. Again on digital on Tuesday, as I said, Mickey 17 and the Monkey are coming out. With original streaming movies, Prime Video has a new Nicole Kidman movie on Thursday. This is a quirky thriller, which also has, I'm blanking on his name, Matthew McFadden from Succession. So that might be worth checking out. She and Kate Blanchett, boy, they're just churning the stuff out. Although Nicole Kidman does particularly well on streaming. Are you going to watch this movie? Then on Friday, Disney Plus has Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Road Trip, which actually looks pretty good to me. Harvey Guillen has a small role on that, so I'm probably going to check that out. And Netflix has The Lifeless with Sophia Carson, who had a big hit for Netflix a couple of years ago with Purple Heart, so don't underestimate that film. That film could do quite well. And Shudder will debut New Zealand horror film The Rule of Jenny Penn, which stars frickin' Jeffrey Rush and John Lithgow. That's amazing star power for Shudder. My goodness. Finally, now with shows, there's a lot happening here too. All right, so starting tonight, Wolf Hall is back on PBS with the second half of its final season. Mark Rylance is on that show, star power there as well. Never watched Wolf Hall. Is it good? Worth watching? And David Blaine has a new magic series on National Geographic. Then on Wednesday, as I said, the studio starts with a 2-episode drop, hoping to be Apple TV's newest sensation, building on that Severance momentum. And Apple TV will also drop all episodes of their Mythic Quest spin-off, Side Quest. And it looks like Netflix is trying to get their traders on with $1 Million Secret also dropping Wednesday. Then on Thursday, it's the final season of Bosch Legacy. Never watched a single episode. Netflix has new comedy Survival of the Thickest, and then hot off of the huge success of Paul versus Tyson, that boxing match which was over on Netflix, the whole Paul family has landed themselves a reality show on Max. Are they the new Kardashians? We'll see. Or what was that other person, that influencer who tried to do the same thing from TikTok and it didn't work out? I don't even remember that name. All right, so finally on Friday, Hulu will drop the entire season of Mid-Century Modern, their new updated version of The Golden Girls. I was very excited for this show. I think it's a fabulous idea, and I got screeners for it. I got to tell you, it's funny, and I love that it's a traditional sitcom, but I only watched one of them. I mean, I'd like to go back to it, and perhaps I will, but I don't think it will have the same broad appeal as Will and Grace. I'm curious to see how the show performs. Well, Apple TV will debut docuseries #1 on the call sheet. This seems great. Looking at the success of Black talent in Hollywood. #1 on the call sheet is the reference to the call sheet. And that's where top of the line and below the line comes from as well. If you're #1 on the call sheet, that means you're the most important person on the set. It's a big thing. It's a big thing to accomplish. And so the first episode, it's 2 episodes. I think they both drop. The first will focus on Black actors, and the second will focus on Black actresses. All right, so that's this week's movie math. What have you been watching? What do you plan to watch? And again, what do you think will be the final box office numbers, domestic and worldwide, for Snow White? And should Disney be worried, right? Even with those other bangers set to come out later this year. And they are slowly switching up department heads. Are we just witnessing a rough transition period? Share your thoughts down below, subscribe today, and of course, as always, you can check out some more videos right now.